Okay, welcome everybody live to this stream. I'm just kidding, it's not live. Pia, thank you for joining. So I received an email a few weeks ago from a person named Odette, and she was curious if you'd like to have a conversation. And so I hadn't personally, Jeff. Let me know if you have different experience. I've not talked to anybody from Europe who's done in the space, the agile coaching space, and so I'm super curious to hear what your sort of experience is there. What's it like to coach over there? But if you want to just take a minute or two to sort of introduce yourself, let us know where you come from, how you got into Agile in the first place. And by the way, thank you for joining us on what I think is a Friday night there.
No, it's a Saturday morning. Saturday afternoon.
Is it Saturday morning?
Saturday afternoon, I believe.
I got it the other way around, didn't I?
Yeah, here it's afternoon actually. So, but thank you so much for having me on here. Very excited to have this talk with you guys. And yes, I'm a change agent and I'm a CEO at the Scandinavian change agents company. So you're fully right here. I work a lot with change, many different kinds of change.
Fantastic. How did you get into that?
Oh, I've been working within this field for more than 20 years. So I have a lot of experience when it comes to innovation, product development, strategies. So that's kind of been my baseline for the last, over 20 years. And I started actually when I was 19. My first real job was actually kicking off by myself, kind of. So I think already from very early on, this entrepreneurial thinking and creativity has always been a big part of my life.
Fantastic. Did you start out in software, or was it product itself, or?
It was actually software. So we were actually in Denmark, we were some of the first ones building content management solutions for websites back then in like 89. So it was quite early on because, the internet came live in 1995, I think. Yeah. So we were quite early on editing. Before that, it was just like a dead business card. You couldn't do much on a web page, right? You could just look it up. It's funny to think back on.
Yeah, it's so different. I got started in websites 95, 96, I think. I had one of the first websites in Chicago about music that was actually connected to a database. So I had a list of bands and a list of venues and a list of shows, and it was all a relational database under the covers, and then you could just sort of have that stuff dynamically generated in views through a thing called CodeFusion. But that was, it was all hand edited. It's completely different than what it is today.
Exactly. Yeah, lots has changed, and now the whole AI coming in, so it's a new big area of change as well, right? So, but it's funny to look back on.
Yeah. Jeff, do you have any?
Yeah, I guess
questions?
I'm curious. So, Pia, you've been working with change presumably in organizations.
Exactly.
Are you focused mostly at the organizational level, or are you really, and I don't know if it's maybe even indistinguishable, working at the individual level versus the organizational level?
I think it's very important to go to the individual level, so definitely there as well. So it's a combo, I would say. But generally realizing that when you are working with, for instance, a digital transformation, there's a lot of stuff that is humanized around this that you kind of need to look into to make it work, actually, to make a success out of your transformation. So that's definitely a lot of what I work with, to try to make it more human, to really understand what's going on from a human perspective, how we as humans take decisions, what we do, and how the change actually affects us.
Mm-hmm. Good. And I the reason I asked that is because it seemed to me, and I kind of alluded to it, being indistinguishable. A lot of times as coaches, we are charged with trying to come into an organization and evoke change to an organization, but sometimes it's successful, many times there's varying levels of success. But I think it's Many times when it's not successful, it's because we're trying to change an organization and ignoring the fact that an organization is made up of people. And if people don't want to change, no change is going to happen, or any change will be temporary. So I'm always curious about new and better ways for evoking change in the individual. So.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting that you say that people don't want to change, because usually what I see in organization is that many people would actually like to change, but they don't they're not giving the space to change actually. So a lot of what I see in organizations is that you kind of just expect that, okay, now we are implementing a new piece of software or a new customer journey or a new process or something like that. But then you actually don't realize how much time it actually takes for each individual in the team or in the organization to actually work differently, because there's so many things that will change for you when you touch other elements. So it's a lot about going more holistically to your change. As one thing, to really look at, where you're actually impacting when you are trying to remove things or do things differently. And then the other part is actually realizing that you are just a person, right? And if you want to change something, the first thing you have to do is make it easy for people and actually giving them the space to actually change. So a lot of what I discussed with managers and C-level managers is that how can we actually create the needed space in your organization to actually make this happen? So that's usually where we start our discussion, and it's quite interesting because it hurts a lot to remove things from the plate, right? It's a bit painful that you kind of have to remove some of your like big projects or stuff that you really want to do, right? But it's actually needed. You have to have a number one, and if this is what you want to do, then you have to realize you have to give people the slack to actually work with it, and that means you have to remove stuff from their table.
That is so interesting, because that's the exact thing that we frequently encounter. Is we walk into situations, and if we talk to executives, what's your driving objective here? Well, I want to be faster to market. So they want to do more, and they want to do it faster, and yet this transformational change is going to, what you're saying, is going to require space to focus on the number one. And it always takes more time, more effort, more everything, but there's no leeway that they're providing for that.
Exactly, but faster, as you were saying, it will go faster in the end. So yeah, the prep and the startup would be a bit more slow. You'll need a bit more preparation time, that kind of thing, and get people into the hang of it. But then when you're then up and running, then you'll be faster. So faster will actually be slower, which is a bit difficult to keep. But if you look at a system, if you have a system that is fully occupied, it's actually not flexible, right? So you have to have some kind of slack in your system to be flexible. And that's at least in my perspective, what Agile is all about, that you kind of create that space for agility.
I have said that a bunch of times. I've heard myself say this over the past years. There's a saying that, I don't know where it comes from, but the idea is smooth is slow and slow is fast.
Exactly.
Right. There's a bit of a J curve there where it's not going to you're not just going to kick off the change and go straight up. You're going to have some period of difficulty, adjustment, slow down. It's not, it's a complex adaptive system. So you have to build that into your expectations. There's a coach here in the United States called Esther Derby, and she says what does she say? People don't resist change. People resist being changed. Mm-hmm. And that's been a lot of my experience as well. It's like, yeah, it's great if you have an idea or an approach to move us to a better place, but do you really understand all the context of people? Because sometimes I go into places and they've been through a couple of efforts at change, and their experience was that there was some stuff missing from the analysis about how exactly this was going to go, and it's concerning for them, and it should be. Like, this is hard, and it doesn't change just means it's going to be different. It doesn't mean it's going to be better necessarily. It could be worse, which is not a thing I want to talk about a lot as a coach sometimes, because it's there is risk involved, but But it makes sense that people would be a little bit reluctant, right? So is it on us as coaches to be more deliberate and sort of realistic about how stuff is gonna? How do you think about that when you're helping clients sort of embark on the change and people are like, well, help me understand where the safety is here, because that's kind of what I hear from people is like, let me see the path through all of this uncertainty and risk is kind of what I hear people say.
Exactly. I think a lot of this comes back to how much you actually involve people in the change. So usually what I recommend is that there's a high involvement for each individual, because generally people want to be involved in what's going on here. So it's way better when you're kicking off a new bigger transformation of some kind, that you kind of involve people. So often what I see is that there is a strategy that is just getting sort of spread all over the organization. But what you really need in this is actually instead getting people involved already from the beginning, and they need to find their own way around it. So it's a lot about talking. For instance, in smaller teams, okay, we want to go in this direction, or we want to create this new thing, or we want to do this in a certain way, or whatever it is that this transformation is about. And then it's actually about interaction, listening in, really seriously listening in and being empathic and actually trying to understand where they're coming from, and then also letting them guide themselves around how do they see they could contribute to this particular change. And then maybe as a C-level, like, it can be a bit hard because you had kind of a vision of exactly where you wanted to go, right? But actually giving a bit of free space here for people to rethink things. It's better to move along and get some results than not moving anywhere, right? So I would say that from that perspective, you have to be quite open-minded, and you really have to let your organization get involved, because this top-down thing, or you just get thrown something in your head, often people have maybe been sitting for half a year or a year working on a certain strategy or some new stuff that they wanted to do, and then suddenly the whole organization needs to now take this in and just do it, right? So it's really a lot about that, I think.
It is funny the number of organizations I've seen where they were like, we're moving to an agile way of working, and the way that we're going to get there is on these specific steps in this order, taking exactly this amount of time, and each time we know what's going to happen at the result of each step. We've got a plan. We're just going to execute on our agile transformation.
Very
it's a
predictive,
bit of an irony.
right?
Very extremely predictive.
Yeah. And how fun is that? How fun is that to be part of that kind of a process, right? Where everybody tells you exactly what to do, when, and how, right?
It's kind of like you took the thinking out of it. You took the fun part out. Like, we're just executing. Yeah.
Well, and I think we've conditioned people and teams to do that, because when in the instances where we're able to say to a team, hey, do it yourself, or enable yourself, okay? Empower yourself. And many times I get a response that says, just tell me what to do. How many times have I heard, just tell me what to do? And so what that tells me is they're so conditioned to just throw it over the wall to me and I'll do my little piece. And so when we try to empower them and say, you are empowered, do it, they're like, no, thanks, but I'm just, tell me what to do. And so we need to figure out ways to, I guess, change that mindset so that they can feel like, oh, I really, really am empowered, and what would that look like for me? How do you go about that, Pia?
Yeah, exactly. Pretty much the same way as the other stuff, because again, it takes time. You can't expect people just to turn around because they've been so used to for a long time to work in a certain way, right? So now they need to shift, and then suddenly they have to create everything themselves. So I would say it again, you need the time for it, but then what you also need is giving them the tools and understanding, what is it actually like to take that empowerment. And as I usually say to people when I work, for instance, with product managers or product owners or product development management, they think that they got a mandate, right? They've gotten a mandate from the management team. But usually what I say is that yes, it's fine that you have the mandate, but you haven't taken the mandate. So for me, it's not about having a mandate, but it's about taking a mandate. So how do you navigate as a person around taking these mandates? And that goes back to the culture also in the team. So it should really be something that you've experienced, that it's okay to take decisions, even though that it might not be the right decision that you always take, then you're always forgiven, or you find your way through it, right? So it's about failing, it's about building the psychological trust in the team that it's safe to say things out loud. It's safe always to say the truth. And that is something I also work a lot with in terms of the management part, because even though you say that you want the truth, and many times it can be very scary as a project lead or as a scrum master or as a developer or whoever sits in this agile team, right? And then there's a C-level person coming into the room, and then you have to be honest about what is actually going on here. So that is something you really need to cater for in your organization. That is really safe for people to say things out loud, because if you're at that position, then you are far ahead, I think, in terms of really working effectively with the Agile as well, and as a team, and succeeding. Because then you grab a lot of these fails or stuff that doesn't work, you grab them sort of in the upcoming, instead of them building up to be a huge elephant. So that's part of this as well, and that has to do with how we react with each other, right? And how you as a manager actually react to your team, how you go into this team, how you position yourself, and then also learning. So that's actually also what I work a lot with around the product managers or the scrum masters, or those who usually leads these teams, right? It doesn't even have to be a C-level. It can be on various levels of the organization. But understanding this team dynamics is very important, I would say.
Yeah, that's been my experience as well. So one of the reasons why when I hear people say, just tell me what to do, it's because they have done stuff in the past that they weren't explicitly told to do, and it didn't go well, right?
Yeah.
They're not up for taking risk because the risk is too great to them. They perceive it. So
either that or they don't feel that they have the competences, because that can be the other part of this, that they simply don't have the capabilities. So of course, that's the other part of this. If you want to sort of support people, then of course you need to have a backup system. So usually what I do in teams is that I put a person who really, really, really knows about a certain thing that you are building or doing, and then you have a body. So you kind of team up with each other, and that's the fastest way to learn things, to really team up and buddy up with people who really, really know their stuff.
Is there a particular, just to drill down on this just real quick, is there a particular technique or approach or model or series of things that you say to leaders who say that they want change, they want different results, they want people to step out and take some risk and and maybe they even provide them the authority on paper of, like, you're now the product owner, you are empowered to say no to people, but then when the no's start to get said, they don't support the people. Is there a way that you help leaders sort of see that? Because I do see that pattern,
Exactly.
A lot, actually.
Exactly. Yeah. Or you say stuff, but then you don't really do it. So that's also a lot of stuff that I see, that even though I really feel that lots of times people are very passionate, they really want to give this empowerment, they really want to do it, but then they kind of come in their way themselves, because the way of their reactions in a team, or when things are going, so it's really about speaking this up, but then showing. So of course it's important to say out loud that this is how I feel, or this is how I think we should do it, but then the most important thing is actually showing that this is actually how you react to it. So it is actually safe to do it the way I said. And that's time. Yeah. So trust takes time. You can't just do like that, right? So generally when I work with these transformations, people think, as you were saying before, Jeff, it has to be really fast, and we just have to go da 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 da. And I'm trying to say the other way around. If you really want this to be successful, you have to give it a bit of time. You can't expect everything to just go around like this.
Pia, do you find that people are receptive, leaders are receptive when you try to enlighten them that you have to slow down here, and there may be a period where it is going to be slower before you get traction. Because to the point that we were talking about, there's an expectation that we walk into, and that expectation has already been baked, that we want this fast, we want transformation to be quick, 6 months, right? No, it's not going to be 6 months.
No.
But it seems to me, though, that when we walk into a situation and they've already got this predisposition towards, we're going to do this fast, how do you, as a change agent, get them to change their mindset? Because let's face it, if they've already felt like we're going to do this fast, they've probably already made commitments. And so now they have to back out of that, and
Yep.
that's not a great place to be. And so you're going to find resistance. How do you help overcome that resistance to enlighten them?
It depends a lot, I would say, from case to case and which person you're sitting in front of, because some people really are quite far in realizing, what it takes. Others are not. But some of the stuff that I usually do is that I go very basic and I go very, very low. So what I usually do is that I start explaining how we as humans actually take on change, and how we actually as persons takes decisions. So I go a bit both strategically but also very scientifically into this usually. So maybe one thing I could start talking about is the system 1 and the system 2 in our brains, how we actually perceive things and how we take decisions. And then trying to kind of explain the backgrounds of the resilience that the managers sometimes experience in a transition, right? So trying to sort of take that in, and then when you start to explain that and giving very concrete examples, then people start thinking, okay, yeah, it actually makes sense what you are saying, that it actually, you have to have slack to actually take this new transition in. Or you have to say to them, you have spent a year working on this particular strategy, and now you expect everybody to take this in one week or 2 weeks or 2 months or something like that. They might even not understand fully what you are thinking here or what you are getting at. There might be very different perceptions of exactly what you are trying to say here. They might not even have understood what you are trying to implement here. So that kind of thing. So usually I go very, very scientifically. I don't know if you guys know about the dual process theory, like our system 1 and system 2 in the brain, but that's one way of discussing this.
Is it Tversky and the other guy, these two economists?
Actually, it's I can't remember. To be honest, I actually can't remember the name of the guy who actually did it. But it's a big part of the toolbox for behavioral design, actually.
Yeah.
So, but it's called dual process theory. I can't remember actually exactly the name of the guy who sort of.
It reminds me of the thinking slow and thinking fast sort of thing, where you've got the one reactive system versus the slower system that's more deliberate.
Exactly.
And people tend to make decisions out of that slow, fast, reactive, less thoughtful area.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so your system 1 is kind of the system that is very, very quick, intuitive, and it's like
but wrong
unconscious.
Sometimes.
Wrong as well. Yeah, exactly. You have to slow that system down now and then if you really want to take wise decisions. So you're fully right on that one. It's also automatic. So it's where all our sort of habits lies. And as we were just discussing before, like the way that you're working in an organization and you have been, handling a certain process or system or working in a certain way, that's kind of become a habit for you, right? So it's your system 1 that you're using for this particular thing. And now this person comes in and then wants you to do something different. So now you have to really work for it. And we are very lazy. We don't want to if we can skip around it, right? So that's where your system 2 comes into play. So the system 2 is kind of the slow, reflective. It's more controlled and it's rational. That's actually the difference.
Yeah, this is so fascinating. This is why I'd never planned to be an Agile coach, right? I just sort of, it just sort of evolved into this. But this is why I find it so fascinating. It's so there's so many aspects of like humanity itself, right? That is you can find because this idea that like people are lazy in the sense, but also it makes sense because if you want to execute, you can't be thinking about stuff all the time in the slow system. Like you need to be able to just do stuff.
Exactly.
It's very advantageous, right? And but you have to be. So it's to me, it seems like it's about helping people understand. If you want to get a bunch of stuff done and you already know how to do it and your system works, you should just execute, right?
Yeah, exactly.
If that system isn't completely well adapted, though, you have to invoke the second system to slow down and think about it. And people get it makes sense, but they have to have it set up for them so they can understand this is why we're slowing down, we're re-examining, we're going to rebuild the system.
Exactly.
And so
it's building a new habit. You know for yourself, if you're trying to do something new, then it will take you some time before you feel really comfortable in doing it, and you might even fail along the way. Often we see that, right? You have certain motivation to do something new, and then you do it for a while because you're very motivated, you really want to do this, but then over time you kind of see yourself slipping back to how you used to do it, right? And that's exactly this that comes into play, and that's why it's so important in organizations as well. If you want to have a continuous transformation going on and you want to create success, you really, really need to take this seriously and creating that slack, and then also support systems around each person, because otherwise we'll fall back to what we used to do.
Yeah, everybody gets this on a personal level, right? So if I'm talking to an executive, it's like, I know there's something you're struggling with. It's what you eat. It's how often you exercise. It's your relationships. It's your whatever. Like you have an area in your life where you're trying to make change and it's not going as well as you'd like it to.
Exactly.
And to Jeff's point, the organization is just a group of people with that same dynamic going on. So, when I frame it like that way, people are they're more open to see how it might be, impacting the org anyway.
Yeah, and it also like putting that in, because another thing that I also often see is that then when you come with this new thing that you want to implement, then people have a lot of other stuff to do. They have KPIs, they have projects that they have promised to deliver on, right? And now you're putting this extra thing on the plate. So how do I navigate in this? So the easy way to do this is like, no, I'm just going to push this aside because it's a noise. It's preventing me from doing what we agreed I'm supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
So it's a very natural thing to kind of push it away unless you talk about it or you say, okay, now this is actually more important than what you're doing over here or here or here. And if you don't tell that, then people will do it automatically. Yeah,
it's really important because if there's change, leaders kind of have to go first, right? Like people are not going to know that this is acceptable and hoped for unless the leaders explicitly say this, like, this is going to be different and this is good. Yeah.
Exactly. And also it's very effective also if you as a leader go in there and be part of the team. That's usually what I do. So I go in also with the management positions that I have had over years. I've worked quite many years in corporate as well. So I always go in there with the team so I understand their pains and their sort of their questions and what we're doing, and then take everything up along the way, and then also making it safe to experiment, because that's another thing here. You might not necessarily know exactly which ways to go here. So the whole experimental point of view is quite important here as well, because it feels a bit safer then, right? Because we can just experiment a bit here with this thing, and then if it doesn't work, we can always roll back, right? And then we can do what we used to do. Then usually people are more like, okay, yeah, this is actually interesting. Maybe we should just try it out. And then, okay, if it doesn't work in a month or two, we can just roll back. Then it's fine. And then people realize often that, hey, this is smart, this is cool, we want more of this, right?
Yeah, so instead of it being success or failure, it's like either it succeeds or you learned about what not to do. And so either way, it's a success if you're learning.
Exactly. So that way, a failure, it's not a failure exactly. That's by the way, how I look at that. So failures are the fastest way to learn, right? Of course, you shouldn't continue making the same mistakes, but like if you make some kind of mistake, you've learned from it, right? So it's the fastest way to learn how not to do things, right? And especially working with this, I think you can't expect not to have failed. So that's another thing also to make really clear actually in an organization, that no matter what we do, we will fail along the way. And that was going back to our personally transformations as well, right? If you have something you want to change, you know that, let's say you want to become a really good runner or something, you know that in between there'll be days where you really don't want to go out in the morning and take on those running shoes, right? It's exactly the same in an organization. There will be days where you fall back or you don't do what you were supposed to do. And then you have to, pull yourself together, and then as a team, say, okay, come on, let's go back to doing what we agreed to do here, right?
Yeah.
But
And that's the team dynamic, which is very powerful.
And many times we see in corporate cultures, though, there is no space, to your point, for experimentation,
Nope.
frankly, because
Nope.
there's an expectation that, hey, you're all experts, so hit the ground running, let's go.
Yeah.
And get it done versus, well, these are complex adaptive systems that we're trying to implement or discover or whatever, develop. And we don't know. And it's not always okay to say, I don't know, in a lot of organizations. It's not a safe space. And so how do you change those barriers or change that cultural mindset, or do you? I mean, I don't even know if it's a possibility to do that.
I would say in many cases you are kind of given a certain space to work with things. So usually what I do in these situations is that, okay, we want to do, for instance, I've kicked off a development team, or we have an innovation team that we kind of go in there. So we kind of have a space around us where we can actually take our own decisions. So usually what I do there in a team like that is that I start actually mapping out people's time. So we actually look at our calendars for a week at a time, for months usually. So we have 4 weeks in a month, and then we start discussing, how much time do we actually use for stand-ups, for retrospectives, for other kinds of meetings that is needed, and then how can we then remove some of these, for instance, because that's usually where I start. Lots of organizations have so many meetings that they don't need to have, or there's too many people in those meetings. so starting to look at that is quite interesting, and then also making people realize that, okay, now we are trying to implement something new here in the team, right? It's a whole new way of working. We are doing some new ceremonies. We're doing a lot of new stuff. So we need Slack to understand how to work with this, how to refine it, how to work with it. Okay, so let's put in at least 30-40% of our time for the next four weeks here during the week, where we actually have time to do these things here. And then being realistic, okay, how much projects do we then have on our table at the moment? We are this many people, we have this much capacity. What is the most important thing for our business right now to actually work on? And then we start discussing, what is number 1 and 2 and 3 and 4? And then when we have a good idea that how can we utilize the team's capabilities best possible to reach kind of the best of these objectives that we have from a business perspective, then we take it into the business, and then we discuss with the whole management team, okay, we think that this is the best way forward. We suggest that we do 1 and 2 and 3. Do you agree? And then usually you will have some really interesting and good dialogues here. And then they say, we also want 4 or 5, but saying you can't have it all, so you kind of have to decide, right? And those are really, really tough discussions to begin with. But then after a while, within a month or 2, then people start realizing, hey, it's better to actually narrow down and saying, yes, we do 1 and 2, because it goes so fast, because the team can really work fast on this, and then they see results, and then they get the delivery the way that they're supposed to, right? And then we can build on and build on. So it's teaching. It's teaching the organization.
Yeah, totally. This is a really key point that I've been talking about more lately. It's like when I go into, let's say, unstable systems of delivery, right, where there's no real way to control the work that comes in. Stuff just piles on. The working process is high. Context switching is high. It's chaotic. You can't just focus on your thing. One of the points I make, and there's this book called Tame Flow from Steve Tendon who talks about this specifically. He's like, if you bring down the arrivals in a system so that the inputs and the outputs match, right, so you've got a stable system, you can get so much speed up just by reducing that work in process. And so what his point is, there's this intuition people have, which is to say, if I want to finish something faster, I need to start it faster. This just makes sense to everybody. It's intuitive, it's obvious, and it's wrong. It's actually wrong, right? So what he says to do is to delay the start of work, delay commitment, and this typically makes people's heads explode because they're used to shoving stuff through the wood chipper as quick as possible because that's obviously what you have to do. And when it turns out to be the opposite, people need some time to think about that, right? It doesn't feel safe to them. Has that been your experience as well? And how do you approach that with people? Because it's the thing we try not to say on this show is mental models, because we talked about it so often before. But like the way that leaders think about the problem, a lot of time constrains what they're willing to let the teams do to experiment, and they never try the behavior that can lead them to the results that would justify continuing to do that. Anyway, how do you what's your experience with that? How does that go for you?
I think that from a management point of view, again, I would try to make as much space for autonomy in the team as possible. So usually when we kick off, I'll try to make that space as autonomous as possible. So kind of saying, okay, if we want to do this like this, then you kind of have to give me free hands to work with however I want to work with this, right? And usually the way I come up with this is quite interesting as well, because in many big organizations, they are kind of still, they want the business cases, right? They want a certain business case to show exactly what's going on here. And I'm trying to move out of that space. So saying instead, okay, why don't we just do some experimenting here, not building a business case? Because in my world, a business case is also a kind of experiment, right? It's just a bunch of people putting their heads together, guessing, coming with their best guess of what this might look like. And then it's a lot of nice numbers in an Excel sheet, for instance, or some other tool, right? But basically, if you're trying to then build instead some experiments where you learn along the way, then you get more and more you get wiser along the way, right? So you do small experiments that takes shorter periods of time, that doesn't cost as much, and then you build on and you build on and you build on. And then at a certain point you have enough knowledge where you're saying, okay, now we've hit something here that is really interesting for our business. We believe that if we do it like this, we can actually grow. And that's where you should start investing, like really full investing, instead of investing a lot in the beginning of it, right?
Yeah.
So that's usually where I start, and then kind of when you then have that in place, then I start working, as I said before, with the team. So you kind of have a picture of where you're going. And then what usually happens, at least on the management team, is that if there's a bunch of specialists now sitting down and saying, okay, we believe we can do this, we recommend that we do it like this, in this certain way, we believe that we have the capabilities to do that and that and that, then you will start to be more convincing, right? And then usually, at least what I see, is that management say, okay, run along with it and let's see how it goes. And then within a month or two, you should of course pick something that you know will be easy to fix, and that you know that you will create some kind of result, right? And then when they see that, they start getting really interested. It's like, okay, maybe this actually works. Okay, maybe we should do more of this, right? So I would never go to the management team like with a huge sort of asking here, because in many cases they don't really understand what this is about. So you're kind of trying to push a person to take a decision on something that they are completely blank about. And if you look inside yourself, then it's not really a nice thing, right? To try to take a decision on something you don't really know really what is this about, right? So it's better to take on the change, and you take the responsibility and then say, okay, it's me who has the responsibility. I'm going to show you. So if you dare to give me free space for a couple of months, I'll show you how this works, right?
Ownership and accountability. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah,
did that answer your question, Matt?
Yes, it did. It did, absolutely. That's comforting. Sometimes it feels a little frustrating for me because I feel like we're reinventing wheels over and over in places, and like the thing that I don't know, like. But honestly, it took doctors like not to speak ill of the medical profession, but it took doctors like 50 years to agree that washing their hands was a good idea before they do surgery. Like, change is not always fast, right? It's like sometimes it takes groups, especially groups of people who are learned, professional, have responsibilities, have risk to change, right? They need to really be able to connect the dots to say, look, before I put my reputation and my responsibility, I have a very serious responsibility to all these people. If it doesn't go well, it could be bad for the org. I have to make sure I understand how to justify this and what put together the theory and the practice and how it all connects in their mind. So what I hear you saying is that like calling your shots in the sense of using a scientific process to say, this is my hypothesis, this is what I think is going to happen, everybody agrees on the theory that would explain it, let's run the experiment. If the data come back and confirm that hypothesis, we can double down on it and we all learn together. And it feels like it's a series of all these parallel, simultaneous experiments happening all over the world in all these companies, and we're converging on a similar set of ideas and practices. It's just, I guess it just takes time, right? I guess it comes back to that's what change looks like. We have to feel our way through the dark in a certain sense, if that makes sense. Exactly.
And that's definitely something you have to have as a manager. You can't expect everything to happen overnight. So that is definitely the way in, I would say. And then curiosity. Usually I say that's your best friend as well in all of this, that to really generally be very curious. And you should be that on all levels. And that's something I sometimes see. The higher you go up in the organization, you sometimes tend to forget that a bit. Or you sit and feel that you are supposed to be the one having all the answers. That's something I see as well, right? You are supposed to, now I'm sitting in this chair as a director, I'm supposed to be the one always knowing what to do here. And that's quite interesting, because when you then sit in those chairs and you are kind of part of that team, then you know that you're not, you don't sit with all the answers, but people tend to think so as well, right? So working with that and showing people that it's okay not necessarily always to have the right answer, knowing exactly what to do here, but we're gonna figure this out together. It's a way more powerful way, I think, at least.
Yeah, in some ways that's one of the essences of leadership, is to say, look, there's an execution focus and there's a learning focus, and there's a balance between them. And where we know that the focus and execution works and then we're just going to do that. We're going to try to get better at doing it. But sometimes we need to move back to the learning and the slowdown and the deliberate focus. And so maybe that's one of the essences of leadership, is to help people understand when to use which sort of perspective and when to move back and forth in that sense, because it's not obvious to people or orgs.
No, exactly. And I think also it's a shame, that also the higher you go in an organization, if you kind of lose that wish or will to learn. At least I see those leaders who are actually implementing this and still daring to, be a bit vulnerable now and then, and also realizing that I also have new stuff that I can also learn. I want to really generally listen in to the teams, or understand, or not necessarily being the one in the room that always take the decisions. Those are the ones that really manage well. Whereas those who sit and think that they need to have all the answers, that is usually not that sort of rewarding in a team and organization point of view, at least.
Yeah, leadership is hard. It requires vulnerability. It's risky.
There was an article recently in Harvard Business Review, and they were talking about how to spot an incompetent leader. And the main thing that they were focusing on was the trait of arrogance. In other words, I know it all, or I know enough, and I can tell you what to do, when in fact they don't know as much as they think they know. And they don't acknowledge that, and so when you've got this arrogance, this hubris, what it does is it closes your mind. It closes out the possibilities. The concept of a beginner's mind is the possibilities are endless. In the expert's mind, the possibilities are very few. And so if you're coming to the table with an air of arrogance and I know it all, just do it, you could be wrong and you're setting yourself up for failure. And so how do you help get somebody to ratchet down their level of arrogance, and you have to do it diplomatically.
Yeah, that's a tough one. First thing I want to say as well, it just to sort of relate to what you're saying, Jeff, is that I see that from time to time I actually see that that managers kind of forget just how they are reacting in a team around this. So it is really important that you are actually listening into your team. So I've seen so many times that organizations are taking bad decisions. They're taking the wrong decisions because they're actually not listening to their specialist. And many times the higher you go up in an organization, the harder it is for you to understand all the details of your organization. So sometimes if you're sitting and thinking that this is the right way forward, right, with this particular thing, then you don't necessarily know all the details. So it's really important that you are connected. So usually what I do in these situations is that I start by, suggesting the C-levels to go, let's go around your organization, let's start listening in. Have you lately, asked your employees or people in the organization about that and that, depending on which area we are talking about, or if they have some issues they want to solve, right? So have you talked to anybody about it? Do you know their particular view on this, or have you listened in to your customers lately, or have you been visiting the stores or whatever? You see more and more of this, probably also now on the internet, that quite many leaders are starting at least to be more visual in the organization, and they are also starting to be more around the processes. And I think that is very much needed, because you need to understand on your body, how things feel. So even though that that there's an issue in customer service with a certain system or so, you don't necessarily know the pain that particular person is going through because this system doesn't work, right? But if you're sitting down there and you are trying to serve customers with a system that doesn't work, and you are the one being frustrated of clicking on buttons that doesn't work, then you have a very different picture of what's going on, right?
Right.
Yeah, the way that this, I like to talk about this or think about it as the curiosity or lack of curiosity, right? And this is, again, that it's a thing that happens at the individual level, and it can get instantiated in the organization as a culture, right? If you got people who are leading that way, it's the way I think about it is, well, how do you know that, right? When they say something like, because a lot of times there's assumptions that are built in. It's Yeah, so the lack of curiosity is sort of a red flag there. It's to your example, it's interesting because sometimes leaders, if I'm not careful, we can drag them into a level of intimacy that they weren't prepared for. In the idea of having them sit with the customer service people and feel the somatic discomfort in their guts. It's like that might be more of a level of vulnerability than they had signed up for necessarily. But the curiosity is one of those sort of master values or master sort of North Stars that I tend to guide people to, because it can uncover the assumptions. It can help us get into those conversations about, well, how did we know that was true, and how would we detect similar errors going forward, right? That can typically be a good thing to talk about.
Exactly, and what you usually experience, which if you really go down there to those teams, they're actually there to support you, and they really curiously wants to help you in this situation, or they want to explain to you what's going on, and they really feel that they are listened to, that they're seen, and that's a really important thing, I would say, for people also to wanting to support a change, because wow, there's actually a person coming down now who really want to recognize that we have this issue, or we have this thing that we want to improve. You have way different motivation in going into something of a change if that happens, right? Instead of you just getting something thrown in your head where you feel that the person who is throwing it in your head have no clue what's going on or what it is that you are actually going through every day.
Yeah.
Pia, earlier you mentioned people are not given space to change. And so providing them that space to change, would you also include incentives? And the reason I ask that is because there are always incentive systems, whether they're overt or covert. We're incented to produce better, perform better just because, maybe there's a performance review or there's money on the table or something like that. But as you probably know, we frequently encounter incentives that are counter to what they're trying to truly achieve, whether it's some transformation or behavioral change. And so do you include incentives in that when you say giving them space to change? Are you inclusive of incentive changes or what?
That's a really good question, Jeff. I think first of all, I would definitely be very curious of what kind of incentive system they already have installed, right? Because you're fully right. Often it goes exactly opposite of what they are trying to create. So that's definitely something to grab onto. But then in terms of this, not necessarily. I think it should be rewarding in itself actually to feel that you are evolving, that you are part of a team that has fun, that you are filled yourself, that you are kind of building new capabilities, you feel that you're doing stuff that really matters, and you can feel that you get better and better and better on it. So at least many of the teams that I've worked within, we didn't have incentives like that. So it was more about saying that we as a team wants to achieve this. We have a goal that we want to run for, and then it's kind of the celebration around it. But then of course we celebrate. We celebrate with champagne, or we go out eating. And so if that's what you mean about incentives, then of course yes, you should definitely celebrate, and you should celebrate often, and you should celebrate all the smaller milestones. So if that's what you mean with incentives, I would say yes, but it's not necessarily built up at a lot of extra KPIs where you have bonuses and that kind of thing. It's not necessarily the money, I would say, that kind of makes people run or do things differently. There's so much more to it than that, I would say.
Precisely, and you hit the nail on the head there. That's really what I was referring to, what essentially become financial incentives. Whether we're incenting people at the individual level when what we want is good team dynamic behavior, and sometimes when you're incenting people financially at the individual level, it can be counter to, them working collectively with a team to get the larger objective accomplished.
Plus, I would say also that working, especially with younger people now, things have changed a lot. So it's much more about you as a person development. It's about your sort of balance in life in general, that I want other things in life. Work is not the only thing that matters to me. So I want you to see me as a full person, right? I have a life and I want to actually have my work fitting into my life and not the other way around. It's important to me with the right values. I want to be part of something that is bigger than just me. I want to contribute sort of to something that is bigger. So you are seeing a lot of changes, I would say, in sort of the team dynamics right now, also from the younger generations now coming into work. So I think that all of these KPI incentives and things that are run by economic incentives, they are not so interesting anymore.
Yeah, not a super effective way to incentivize knowledge workers is what I think the studies have shown us.
Yeah, and it's more important for people to just keep growing, right? And that is also, that's how you keep your own value. You need to have space to grow because you know that things are changing. So if you don't grow yourself, then you will be left behind. So having space and having an organization that supports you constantly in growing is actually very valuable.
Yep. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose, I think, is still the best way to think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we want to be sensitive to the time. We're almost at the top of the hour. I think this has been great. Jeff, any wrap-up items that you want to, questions or points?
I think probably just one. And as coaches, are there things, behaviors, practices that we should be especially mindful of as we help coach organizations and more specifically individuals in their journey?
I would say that it's very interesting to look at the friction part. That's usually something I don't see people spending so much time on. So starting off, usually when I start off projects, I take the no hat on, or I do a point of departure where we also talk about how will it look like if we fail. And another thing is that being very much aware that whatever you're creating, what impact does it actually have on different stakeholders, on different touch points, that kind of thing. And then really working on all the frictions. So really understanding, what kind of frictions might be triggered by whatever we are building or doing here. And then trying to find solutions for those triggers is very effective, I would say, in terms of change, because then you can take a lot of this stuff up front. And then you know already that maybe a certain kind of person will, okay, that's going to be resistance here, right? So how can we kind of work around this? And then as part of this, involve everybody in it. Ask people, how do you feel about this? Okay, if this were to happen, how would you feel about it? How would you think you would react to it, for instance? That's
super interesting. I've heard that concept described as a pre-mortem. So instead of the post-mortem and the retrospective, you know some of that stuff ahead of time, so maybe do it. Interesting.
And go do it on the way. So probably you guys have retrospectives, right? So usually what we do along the way every month when we had retrospectives, we also take in these things. So I can, for instance, I facilitate many different kinds of funny workshops around this. So one could be a balloon, for instance, and then part of this is that, okay, what will actually drag us down, So there's sun ahead, So what will make us flow higher? What will take us down, that kind of thing. So you constantly actually talk about things that either has happened and has drawn you down the last month, and then what you expect could come and draw you down for the next months or something like that. So you constantly kind of talk to your team around these things. So you grab things before they actually become a problem. And then you can also be proactive with the management, because that's another thing that I often see. When you are trying to implement something, right, you will always be stuck on something you couldn't really interpret in the beginning. So there will be stuff that you didn't really know would happen, right? But if you do these exercises, then you can proactively go back to the management and say to them, hey guys, you know what, we actually stuck on this particular thing. I think this means that and that and that and that and that. And that means also that we might be a bit delayed, or we need to change a bit, we need to do. And then it's way easier for them also to take this in, because then they have time also to kind of reflect on this and adjust to the fact that, okay, I thought we were going to launch this here, but maybe it's going to be here instead. Whereas if you come sort of in the end of it and saying, we're really sorry we didn't make it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Bad news
so you
doesn't
don't want
get
to
better with time.
Yeah.
so Pia, you don't want to just have a plan and just execute the plan when it comes to Agile transformation? You don't want to just have a series of dates and do stuff on?
No, not necessarily. Of course, I think it's a misunderstanding that being creative, working with innovation, working with Agile, working with whatever system you're working with, it's a mistake to think that you are not structured. You are very, very structured. There's a lot of ceremonies, there's a lot of tools you're using, there's a lot of stuff you use. Even in your creativity, in your ideation phases, you have to be very structured to create something. So that's a mistake, I think. But you are right. You have to be flexible. You have to accept that things might not go the way you supposed or thought it would go. And then you have to be good at adapting to that.
That's super interesting. That's another one of those patterns where it applies to the person and applies to the org. There's this idea at a personal level that discipline equals freedom, right? If you look at some of the more creative people, they get up every day at the same time. They have their thing.
Yes.
And then they go write their nonfiction books, or they write their screenplays or whatever. It's like the
back to system 1 and 2 here, because they want to use their system 2 for exactly being that creative, and then the rest of what they're doing should be as easy as possible, so they don't use brainware. So that is actually something you can really nerd with, being very good at putting as much as you can into your behavioral really habit thing, and then you're using your system 2 because you have a limited source of system 2 every day. So you should work in flow. That's another thing that I try to nerd quite much around. Like, how do you as a team and as a person work in your flow? You should work during the day, where you feel most in flow. There, that's where you should do the hardest thing. So you never do a workshop, iteration workshop in the afternoon on a Friday, for instance, right? That's not a good idea.
Right. So to bring it back to the org transformation thing, it's the idea that Agile is like this touchy-feely, like no rules. It's actually the opposite. It's more.
Yes.
It's more structured so that you can have a maximum capacity for the creativity that you're trying to bring. Is what I hear you saying.
I think that's my perspective on it, and that's at least how I try to work around it. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I agree. So we're technically out of time. Before we leave, any other thoughts you want to leave us with, Pia? Where to find you online? Upcoming events that are you want to talk about, or anything else before we leave?
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt and Jeff. This has been a really interesting dialogue, and I think it's very important topics that we've actually touched upon here, since I generally think that we should talk much more about the human part of change, actually, within these big transformations. And if people want to reach out to me, they can either contact me on via my website, so it's ScandinavianChangeAgents.com, or they can also find me on my LinkedIn profile under my name, Pia Wendelbo.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for joining us. I agree. This was a great conversation. So
Yeah,
it was a pleasure.
such a joy. Yes, what
Yeah.
a pleasure. And I like your term brainware. I don't know that I had ever heard that before, but I caught that and I thought, wow, I like that. Very good.
yeah,
I'm glad
learning
to.
it down myself. All right. Thank you so much, Pia. We'll
Thanks,
talk to you
Pia.
soon.
Hope to talk to you again.
Yeah, this was really awesome. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
You as
too.
well.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye
Bye,
now.
guys.
See ya.